Spinning. Hi, everyone. It's Tevis Trower, and I am thrilled to bring to you another Game Changer chat. I'm trying to listen and see if I have an echo. I didn't on the prep, but I'm thrilled to share with you someone who has absolutely inspired a movement. His name is Raj Sisodia. He's the co-founder of Conscious Capitalism, and we're going to dive into, you can find tons on this guy. He's written 12 books. So there's plenty out there on his business thinking. We'll be talking about that, of course, because as co-founder of Conscious Capitalism, there's a lot to talk about. But given the frequency with which you are on interviews, conversations, etc., I was interested in sharing with everyone Raj the man. So before we dive into that, I'm going to give a quick tech update. For those of you who have come to Game Changer Chats, you may be aware that we're broadcasting across the LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook on 2 outlets on Facebook. So if you want to ask a question or chime in, I have found that sometimes it's easier to get a question through on LinkedIn. Sometimes the Facebook connection works and sometimes it doesn't. So if we miss a question that you would like to ask, I will make sure that I or Raj follow up afterwards. So with that said, Raj, welcome and thank you for coming to Game Changer Chat.
Thank you, Travis. Really happy to be with you and good to see you again.
Awesome to see you. So Raj, you may not have known this when we met the second time in San Diego about a year and a couple months ago. I've been working on this idea for a long time of what is it in us that allows us to step out of what's expected of us and really craft a life of our making and a contribution that aligns with our values. And so these chats are really an opportunity for people to learn, not just from the amazing things that we build, but from our process of really speaking to that muse inside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure you're game.
Sure, yeah.
And one of my favorite questions to start these things out with is, what did you love to do as a young boy?
Yeah, so as a young kid growing up in actually a variety of different environments, I mean, I really had a very diverse set of experiences as a kid. I spent the first 5 years literally in a tiny village in India, living in a big joint family with my grandfather, my uncles, aunts, cousins, and my mom. My dad was away, so he was away getting his bachelor's and then master's and eventually PhD in Canada. So I really had no memory of him. But this was a large joint family, and actually it was a very feudal system that I was part of. My grandfather was kind of the land-owning, overlord of that whole village. And it was a feudal, highly patriarchal, and I would say in many ways misogynistic culture. India has these different castes, right? So we come from that warrior caste, and within that, the Rajputs are especially sort of, I would say, warlike in that way and more extreme in many ways. So I grew up seeing, I would say, the extremes of the hyper masculine approach.
Wow.
Way of being and all the abuse and everything else that came along with it. And but my own nature was really perhaps shaped by my mother, but also maybe I was born more like her, right? So I was a very peace-loving, sort of trusting, a gentle kid who never got into any fights, more sort of in my head, intellectual perhaps, and idealistic and very trusting, and so that was just my nature, essential nature. And my mother reinforced that because those were her qualities as well. And my father was not present to counterbalance that with he was more in the image of my grandfather. Mm-hmm. But he was also brilliant academically, which is why he went on to achieve a lot academically and won gold medals everywhere he went. But I would say that I was, very, I love to read. I love to think about things. I always wondered, why can't everything be peaceful? Why can't people just get along? I think I had a good sense of humor. I was not very athletic, I would say. So I was more, once I started going to school, I think, shone a little
Mhm.
bit more there because I was more inclined that way. So, and then later on, I actually enjoyed writing. Even
Mhm.
as a teenager and in college and in my graduate program, and I did a fair amount of writing. And nobody ever asked you in those days, what's your passion, what's your dream. If you were good in math and science, you pretty much were steered into engineering in India. If
Mhm.
you were good in biology and science, you kind of went towards medicine. And if you weren't good in either of those things, then God help you, you kind of you get a
Yeah.
bachelor of arts and try to figure something out. But
Yeah.
but I had those experiences. So we were in India until I was 7, and then my father came back from Canada, and then we moved to Barbados. He got a job there, and then we moved to California in Salinas, up near Monterey County, and then moved to Canada for a year in Winnipeg, and then went back to India when I was 12. So from 7 to 12, we lived
Wow.
in the West, and then back to India. And so those were very significant transitions in a way. It was
Yeah.
like two different worlds. It's not like today where the world is connected. In those days, it was very, very separate.
When do you feel like you really became aware of the patriarchal and the feudalistic assumptions that you were being raised under? I'm just curious how that awareness
Yeah.
took shape.
So as a child, of course, I observed it and sort of absorbed it, but I didn't really make sense of it. I mean, that's all I knew, right? But then we get transported across the world, and if you think about, I mean, I'm 62 now, so we lived in California when I was from the ages of 9 to 11,
Mhm.
and this was 67 to 69, and these were tumultuous times. Both on the positive side and the negative side. We had, of course, Martin Luther King getting shot, Robert Kennedy
Yeah.
getting killed. I mean, I saw all these things as they were happening live on TV. You had the riots in Chicago, and the Democratic Convention. You had the anti-war movement, the hippies, and then on the other side, you had man landing on the moon. Sort of the highest aspirations of what we can be.
Mhm.
So it was a pretty eventful time. So I experienced all of that in my formative years. I was very, very aware of what was going on in the world, and then we go back to India just before I turned 12, and I get sort of transplanted back into. It was like going back a century in time,
Wow.
and back into that feudal. And now I could see it with outsider eyes. So I think part of my gift from all of those experiences was being able to simultaneously be an insider and an outsider,
Yeah.
right? So I could see, wow, things that my cousins and uncles and others took for granted. I mean, I would just look at it and be horrified. The way they treated them, we call them servants. But they were really almost, I would say, a version of slavery in a way. They were
Yeah.
indentured. I mean, they were with us for generations. The entire families worked with us. And if somebody did something that my cousins or uncles did not like, I mean, literally, I remember my cousin, he took this kid who was probably my age when I was about 13, and he was working in our home and doing stuff for us in the city. And my cousin heard that he had done something that was inappropriate. I don't remember even what. Nothing, not a serious thing. But he literally came from the village. He tied this kid to a tree, and he whipped him with a rope
Wow.
in our yard. And
Wow.
I'm like horrified. I'm just back from California. I'm like, what is, you know? And but I saw the
Love and civil rights and
yeah, and my own nature being what it was, very peace loving and idealistic. And it was like the violence, the aggression, the misogyny. As I said, my grandfather would yell at the women, scream using abusive language to them and finding fault with everything. And they would just sit there with their heads covered on the ground, on the floor, as he shouted at them for,
yeah.
45 minutes. So I observed all of this. I saw tremendous amount of suffering there, and I could see it for what it was, whereas the people who were sort of part of that system, they just accepted it. That's the reality.
Yeah.
So but I could see that, and I think one of the gifts of all of that was that 30 years later or 40 years later, whenever it was, why did I write a book with Nilima called Shakti Leadership about the feminine? Because I had to experience the worst of the masculine.
Yeah.
many ways, and I had to have that sort of sensitivity to be able to see that, right? So in a way, the last few years have been about making sense of my life and the experiences that I had, however harsh and brutal in some cases they were at the time, that they served a purpose and they created something within me, sensitized me to certain things that eventually I could then bring to the world in a different way.
Yeah. Raj, I want to applaud you because I know a lot of us have aspects of our upbringing that have caused us grief, pain, a sense of shame about our forebears, right? In fact, dig deep enough into any of our family histories, I'm sure that we all have it. But for you to share it so transparently and even handedly, I feel like is really a role model, because it's kind of like, until we acknowledge what we've seen and what we've come from, and potentially how those aspects of culture have set us up in some ways to be successful or to have access to resources, is really a lot of what the conversation is on the planet at this
Yeah.
point. So thank you for speaking so transparently. I'm curious too. I get the reading, I get the writing. I really appreciate what you said about, if you're good at math, then you go be an engineer. If you're good at bioscience, you become a doctor, etc. You went from a feudally advantaged family and a very intelligent father from a warrior class to marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of a.
There is warfare in marketing, absolutely.
Well, I did remember an assigned reading in our PhD program was an article called Marketing Warfare,
Yep.
which is borrowing the language and the sort of strategic aspects of conducting war and applying that to business and marketing. But my path was somewhat jagged. I would say it was opportunistic, always growing up in India in those days, in the 70s, where it was a dead economy and there were very few options. It was a very centrally planned, controlled economy, and very closed economy as well to the rest of the world. And so you had those limited options, but I had no passion to be an engineer. So it was extremely challenging and hard, because this was one of those elite engineering institutions where everybody who came there was quite smart. But 5 years of that, and then I had a job as an engineer, and I discovered that if you got an MBA, that your salary would double and you would work in a nice air-conditioned office rather than in a hot factory.
Profit motive and comfort, cash and
Yes.
comfort, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So of course I quit my job and I got into one of the MBA programs in Mumbai, in what used to be called Bombay. And so those 2 years I enjoyed the MBA. Compared to engineering, it was easy and somewhat more interesting. But then at the end of that, near the end of that, I already had a job lined up, which was 2.5 times what I had been making before. So that part was true, with a consulting firm. But in my last semester, one day I came down for breakfast and a group of my friends were dressed up and going somewhere. And I said, "Where are you going? We don't have any classes today." They said, "We're going to the US Information Agency to get GMAT applications, which is the graduate management admission test." I said, "Why do you need that? We're already doing our MBA." They said, we want to apply for a PhD in business."
Oh.
I said, "Oh, I didn't know you could get a PhD in business." My father was a PhD in plant science, right, in cytogenetics. But I thought I had reached a dead end in my education. I said, "Give me 5 minutes, I'll come with you."
Yeah.
And so 8 of us went to get those applications. And the irony is, I'm the only one out of that group who ends up coming here to get a PhD, right? And if I hadn't come down for breakfast at that moment, who knows what would have happened, right? So I get a full scholarship to Columbia and to Cornell and Michigan and a few other schools. And so, of course, I go to Columbia and marketing, because Columbia was the best in the world in marketing at that time.
Wow.
So, and I knew I didn't like finance. I was bored. So marketing seemed more interesting. So I get a PhD in marketing, but it was an accidental choice in a way, right? It was, to me, a means to an end, because I had lived here as a kid and I wanted to come back, but I didn't know how. And here was an all expenses paid experience to come to the US and get a PhD and then become a professor. So suddenly my life took a turn and I became a professor.
I'm was something that piqued my interest while you were talking about this entire trajectory, right? And that is, did you ever try to force yourself into being this kind of a patriarchal, more aggressive? Like, did you ever try to?
Yeah. Well, my father tried a lot, right? Because I was not a kid in his image in the sense, right? I mean, he is very confrontational, he's very aggressive, he is very patriarchal in his mindset, more conservative, all of that. And I was pretty much the opposite. So what happened to me, and I didn't know him until I was 7, remember? So he comes back when I'm 7, and to me he was like a stranger, this mythical figure who had been across the world, and he came back, and literally there was a 50-mile parade to welcome him. I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, there was a parade of cars. It was just like a massive thing. Thousands and thousands of people showed up to welcome him. And but because I was so different from him, so I started getting the message from him that everything that came naturally to me, I needed to be the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I was very trusting. You would say, no, don't trust anybody. I was very idealistic. You would say, no, you cannot be idealistic. You have to be pragmatic, right? I was very peace-loving. He said, no, you need to be confrontational, right? You need to be rough and tough. And I was very good in school. And he would say, oh, that doesn't matter. You need to be street smart, academic smarts. So, and in this new book I'm working on, I talk about the path, right? And the steps along the journey. And one of them is to know yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And then the next one is a big leap for many of us. It's just to love yourself. Right. Now, to the extent that I knew myself, I kind of despised who I was, because my father was this larger than life figure in my life, coming from a patriarchal system, and even, given what he had accomplished compared to most. And so when he's telling me that you need to be the opposite of everything you are, so everything that came naturally to me, I came to view it as a defect. Right? That I need to be the opposite of what comes naturally to me, right? So over the years, that meant becoming cynical, becoming unduly argumentative or confrontational at times, not trusting, all of those kinds of things, not being in harmony with your nature, not being true to yourself, right? So that was a huge, it took me decades literally to get over that, right? To come to a place of not only acceptance of who I am, but actually coming to appreciate and then be grateful for. And that only really, I mean, the final piece of that, I would say, it only happened 2 years ago.
Oh my God. Okay, so I love this so much, because so many people I know who have achieved great things have done it in the face of the message from the world, from parents, from whatever institutions, role models, leaders, to be different than who we are. And when I read, I'm going to go ahead and just read some top lines from bio, sorry. Because what's amazing is had you continued to try to be or have these qualities come forth that were not true to you, I just can't imagine you accomplishing any of this stuff. I mean, you've been called an intellectual shaman in a recent book with that title. You had your groundbreaking book, Forms of Endearment, which really was one of the first books to set forth the questions about the purpose of capitalism across the stakeholder spectrum. You've been a leader. You co-founded Conscious Capitalism along with John Mackey from Whole Foods. You've written 100 articles, 11 books, including the book that I love, Everybody Matters, which is just about how do you value everyone throughout the chain of activity in your company. Along with Shakti Leadership, which really looks at the benefits and the power of a feminine approach to leadership. You're still working as a professor. You're a visiting professor at Tec de Monterrey, which you and I have spoken about. I love that place, amazing place. So here you are creating change. And it's almost indivisible that the place from which we find bliss, in the words of Joe Campbell, is also coupled with our discontent, right? It's coupled with our discomfort.
Yeah.
And I think that because right now is such a time of discomfort for so many of us, right? To look at your life and the lives of many of the people probably around us and really have conversations about what made you uncomfortable and how did you move towards not just shutting up and fitting in, but really expressing. So you said it took decades. You've probably only done it in the past years.
Well, I would say the turning point was 15 years ago. As you correctly pointed out, Firms of Endearment was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, new stage. Before that, I had been a professor for 20 years. So it's been 35 in all. And I became, as you know, an accidental professor, as I described earlier, right? It was not, I didn't grow up with a dream to become a marketing professor. I don't know of anybody who does. I mean, that would be worrisome, right, if they did. But that's how it became. But I was a reluctant warrior, in that journey. I was part of that system. I was trying to teach what I was being told I needed to teach. And but I never really believed in the story of business, the way it was being told. I never really believed in the way marketing was practiced. Where we use customers and try to manipulate them in a very clever ways to do things that are good for the company, but not necessarily good for them. So I went along with that, but my research very quickly became about what's not right about this. So I started with marketing ethics. I used to do research on that. It's full of ethical mindlines, the way we, false advertising or price gouging or marketing to elders or marketing to children or using women's bodies to sell products and all the negative consequences that flow from all of that and the sheer waste of it. Right? So I focused also on the efficiency and effectiveness. We were spending $1 trillion a year in 2004 on marketing. Now it's 1.3 trillion. Now that was the GDP of India that year. Okay. So we were spending for 300 million people on ads, coupons, and junk mail, what 1 billion plus people were living on in India. And I said, wow, what is that getting us, right? For customers, for companies, for society. And my answer was not much, and in fact, quite negative in many ways, right? So for about, I would say, a good 15 years, my research was focused on what's wrong with marketing. And I had this growing sense of unease and then eventually shame in a way about my profession.
Yeah.
And this is what Joseph Campbell, as you mentioned, talked about. You follow your heartbreak. And so I was following my heartbreak. What doesn't ring true? I would have my students in my MBA classes do projects on unethical marketing and scams and all those kinds of things and uncover those. I even partnered with some TV stations and media people to bring those to light, etc. So I was, and I had this inner dialogue because I'm trying to be worthy of my father. I'm trying to impress my father with my success in the world, right? And but my inner dialogue was that my father got a PhD in plant science because his dream was to cure world hunger. I got a PhD in marketing, right? And I'm trying to sell you some more potato chips. That mine was not an inherently noble or self-justifying occupation. In fact, when my father first learned that I was getting a PhD, he would say, my son is a professor of marketing. He would do that. It's like, what is that? Is that the stupid ads that we see and all those, gimmicks that we, are constantly sales and all of that? So I had a deep lack of respect for my work, for my profession.
That's hard. That's really hard.
And so eventually by 2004, I did a book called Does Marketing Need Reform? We did a conference with that theme. We did a study on the image of marketing. 88% of people don't trust marketing. If it's marketing, that means it's not real. It's not true, right? And so all of that led me to propose a book to my mentor. I was calling it The Shame of Marketing.
Wow.
And I said, marketing, causes all kinds of negative. We waste resources and we abuse and use people and all of that. So that phrase came from Peter Drucker, but that's where my head and heart were at. That I was deep into the following my heartbreak. And my mentor at that point gave me good advice. He said, Raj, people would rather hear about the solution and not the problem. And so I just turned that around. I called
ding,
it.
Ding.
Yeah, it's simple insight, but I wasn't there, in my headspace. So I turned that around and I called it In Search of Marketing Excellence. I said, companies spend a ton of money and their customer loyalty and trust keep going down.
Mhm.
What's the opposite? Customers who love companies even though they're not spending anything on marketing. So how, very little on marketing. That's how we discovered those companies that are in firms of endearment, right?
Yeah.
Very little marketing spending and yet customer love. And then we discovered it was a bigger picture. It was
Mhm.
not just customers, it was everybody, right? Employees, suppliers, communities embraced them, loved them. And why? They had a sense of values and they had a reason for being. And that's what attracted everybody. Said, wow, this is Whole Foods is about improving our health and the health of the food system and the planet. I want to be part of that, right? As an investor, as a supplier, as an employee, as a customer. So that sort of became, and then the distinct moment when I felt a light bulb go off or my heart sort of come alive, I'm writing some of the stories of these companies and what they did for their people and the families and the communities and so forth. And I literally had tears in my eyes.
Oh, wow.
And trying to write. And this was June of 2005. We were sitting in the Poconos in Pennsylvania at a writing retreat, David Wolf and I, my co-author. And I said to David, I've never had a positive emotional reaction to my work before. I have never had tears of joy in my work, ever. Right? I think very few people can actually remember if they had tears of joy in their work, right? And I said, David, I think I just found what I want to dedicate the rest of my life to. This is the story of business that I want to
You want to tell?
learn more about it and create. So this is what Joseph Campbell talked about, finding your bliss.
Mhm.
Right? So follow your heartbreak, follow your bliss. Somewhere in there is your purpose. So I think from that day on, I became, and this brought me to life. It kind of, I felt a physical reaction. And I think when your body tells you, you have to listen to your body because it's telling you something. You have found something, the key to unlock something deep within you. And so that began the journey, right? And that's how I met John Mackey. He loved that book. And I said, my vision is to create a movement. I was calling it the Institute for New Capitalism, or INC. I always have an acronym for everything. And he looked at that and he said, oh, that's my vision as well, but I like conscious capitalism. So that's how we started the next year. And as you know, everything else that you talked about. But, it came full circle, Tevis, 2 years ago, because I turned 60. I was kind of at a turning point in my life, or at least a reflection point, right? It's like, wow, how did that happen? First of all, like 60, right? It's not a midlife crisis, but it's kind of another major milestone. And I was thinking about, and I was also starting to work on my most recent book, The Healing Organization. And that idea had come to me, and I had been thinking about it and researching some of those companies, etc. But it was still more an intellectual project at that point. I mean, I felt it at an emotional level, but not fully embodied it yet. And then three people said to me, three women actually, including Nilima, our common friend, said to me, you're always rushing around and you're going from one book to the next. And then I was traveling like 50, 60 times a year and all over the world giving talks. So I'm always, one airport to the next airport and then writing and all of that. And he said, if you're going to write about healing, you need to slow down. You need to look inward. You need to recognize what needs to be healed within you, right? And take the time to do that. Otherwise, a book on healing coming from you has no meaning, right? So I said, I don't have time for that. I've got a book deadline, October 5th. I said, no, book deadlines are flexible. So Nilima said that, and then Lynn Twist, who started the Pachimama Alliance. And I was interviewing her for the book, and the next morning she calls me and she said, you were in my dream last night. So she said, yeah, you need to come with us to the Ecuador, to the rainforest in Ecuador. We take a group every August, the Founder's Journey, deep into the rainforest. We spend 10 days with different native, the Achuar and the Zapara people. We have shamanic healing experiences. It's life-changing, and you will learn more about healing in those 10 days than a year of research. So she's almost commanded me to come on that trip,
Get thee to Ecuador.
Yeah. And then I had said no to a silent retreat that was happening in upstate New York with Peter Senge and David Cooper-Ryder and a bunch of people I knew and respected. And I said yes to them. And those 4 days were incredible. I just got so many downloads. Of course, I went to with Nilima, we took a Shakti trip up to the India-China border near Tibet. Deep in the high Himalayas, above 20,000 feet, and deeply immersed in the Buddhist wisdom. And if you want to learn about healing and suffering, The Buddhist tradition has so much to offer there. So I had all these incredible experiences, and it culminated also in working with a coach. And the coach, after she heard my life journey, heard about my family background, my relationship with my father, which was very difficult. I mean, he cut me off for 5 years when I got married to somebody he didn't approve of. He never acknowledged the birth of my child. We just had this. There's just a lot of bitterness and hurt that permeated my life because of that relationship. When she heard all of that and the way my work had evolved, she said, "Do you realize that you have been honoring your mother with your work for the last 15 years? That you spent, I don't know, 45 years of your life trying to be worthy of your father. You'll impress your father, right? To no avail, because you can never be like him, right? And then 15 years ago, you kind of found your true essence, your path, and that was actually reflecting everything your mother stands for, because she is pure love, pure service, empathy, all of those qualities. I mean, she's almost a pure distillation of the feminine, and never, I mean, in 61 years, never raised her voice to me, never got angry at me, always was just unconditional, pure love. My father was conditional love.
Yeah.
Right? You do what I say and then you get the benefits, otherwise you're nobody to me. And so she said, "You've been honoring your mother with your work." And I said, "Wow, I never thought of it that way." And then she said, "Does your mother know that?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know it. How would she know it?"
She might. She might.
No, and she said, "You need to call her,
Mm.
tell her that." And I said, "Well, we don't talk like that in my family. We talk about the weather and we talk about how are your knees feeling and those kinds of subjects." She said, "No, you need to call her." I said, "Well, my dad always picks up. He's always there, and he puts it on speaker. And if I talk, he's going to say, 'What's wrong with him? Why is he talking like that?'" And she said, "No, I don't care. You need to call her." I said, "Well, I'm going to India in 3 weeks. I'll just tell her in person." She said, "Your mom is 82. You don't know what happens in 3 weeks. You need to call her." So, of course, next morning I called her. And, Travis, it turned into the most healing conversation of my life, because she had no idea. I know she was very proud, and it made her very happy to see the books and to see me on TV or in the newspaper or wherever. I don't know if she really understood what I did. But so then I told her, "Mommy, everything that I've done that people have cared about, that has made any kind of difference in the world, is because of what you stand for, and and how you have lived your life, and what you have taught us, and how you have loved us. That's what the world is hungry for, and that's what the world needs. And the world has enough of what Papa, we call him Papa, that he stands for. It's all the aggression and the tough and all of that, right?" And she just started crying. She said, "I am nothing. I am nothing." And I said, "No, you are everything." She had this sense of being less than. I mean, because she was only educated until the 8th grade. And my dad was this gold medal winning PhD, etc., scientist. So she always thought of herself as insignificant. She didn't really speak English. She's just there taking care of everybody and serving everybody her entire life, And I said, "No, that is what has made a big difference in us, So it just turned into, as I said, the most healing conversation. And I think it gave her, near the end of her life, a sense of peace, in a way, to say, because she would say to my sister-in-law, "My life, I don't even know what my life was about. I never really enjoyed living," because she was in a tough marriage with a very difficult, my father. But this gave her some sense of satisfaction, or something, that this actually was meaningful, that there is a legacy there, And so that happened 2 years ago, and then last year both my parents died.
Oh, wow.
I was able to have that kind of experience with her, as well as with my father. I was able to have some closure, But I think it's clarified for me, in a way, that my journey has been about bringing that to the fore. But that's not the end of the journey, because as we know from Shakti leadership, it's not just about replacing the masculine with the feminine. It's about bringing the healthy aspects of the masculine. And my father embodied both the healthy and the unhealthy.
Yeah.
He has strength and courage and discipline and focus and determination, but he also was domineering and controlling and aggressive and all of that.
Yeah.
But so how do I not reject those positive qualities? Because my mother was pure love, but she had no personal power.
Yeah.
She never stood in her personal power.
Well, that's a big point. I mean, I think that we talk about toxic masculinity with some fluency, but we don't really talk about the generative aspects of the masculine, and nor do we talk about the toxic aspects,
Right.
the feminine, other than through a caricature like reality TV or
Right.
something.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's, to me, the distillation is, how do I now integrate what she stands for? And I still lead with that energy. I mean, I still believe that, to me, the lead, for me, that energy, my mother's energy, is the lead, but supported by the strength and courage and resilience and determination and focus that my father did embody all his life. That gives it power. That gives it much more power to actually make a positive difference in the world. So I'm kind of going through my own Shakti integration in my.
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
I mean, because as an Xer, I'm turning 52. And a lot of the imprints I grew up with, especially as I found my way from a hippie household into corporate, was I've got to show up in a very aggressive, strong, and resolute kind of way. And Raj, this is kind of a moment on the planet in which so much of what we're talking about has come to the surface. And I roll my eyes. Sometimes, I'll be honest, I'll pop into my Facebook or my LinkedIn wall, and everyone's talking, oh, it's culture, it's humanity, it's compassionate leadership. And I roll my eyes, going, kind of like a teenager, right? Toxic. Going, we've been talking about this for forever, right? But there's a lot of heads nodding too, right? There's a lot of people who want to say, yes, I agree with that. I agree with that for my company. It's a great idea. But very few of us think that we are the problem. And one of the things I loved about the healing company that you just came out with, when did that book come out?
September of last year. We're working on the paperback right now, so we have a new version.
So one of the things I loved is that you really underscore that we can't bring that into the organization unless we are doing it for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We can't foster a conscious culture, a compassionate culture, if we haven't done that work ourselves. And you just kind of explained where it took you. It took you to the forests of Ecuador. It took you to Buddhist far-flung in the Far East, right? But I'm curious, so many people are being exposed to, I'll call it spirituality light, right? We're being exposed to like a meditation app, or we hear a cool quote and we share it with our friends, be the change or whatever. But how do we as leaders really walk into our own forests and understand our woods so we can bring a higher level of consciousness, skillfulness, self-awareness to our next meeting, to our next war in the classroom?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important question. I think what we need, some disorienting or disequilibrating experiences.
Yeah.
And we need guides, to be able to elevate to another level of consciousness. And for me, that 2 years ago was filled with that, between Lynn Twist and Nilima and many others, my coach. But also, the rainforest experience was profound in another way, because you talk about being in disequilibrium or disorienting. Part of that journey also was a series of shamanic healing experiences. Tobacco rituals and all kinds of sacred waterfall rituals and various other things, but it culminated in an ayahuasca journey. Are you familiar with ayahuasca? I'm sure you've heard of it.
I have experienced it.
You
yes.
have? Okay, so this turned into a really profound thing for me, because it came at the end of a day. The whole day was kind of building to that, right? We had we took a 1-hour boat ride up the river, and the shaman then came with us, and then we hiked for a couple of hours. We went to a sacred waterfall and we had a cleansing ritual there in the waterfall with tobacco. And then we hiked back to the shaman's place. And by this time it was late in the afternoon. And then we bathed in the river next to the plateau, kind of next to the river. And then by that time it was getting to be dusk, and the shaman had prepared the ayahuasca, and we sat in a semicircle around him, and he was blowing and chanting and singing and so forth, into that. And then each of us went up and took that, and then they had laid out banana leaves on the ground for each of us to lie on. And it was, I know, a lunar eclipse night. There were literally like 6 planets, I think, lined up, from one horizon to the other. And it was just a surreal experience. And then when it kicked in, and the shaman was standing over us, chanting and whistling and blowing and, sort of swishing branches. And it was just like, wow, we're transported somewhere. And the ayahuasca is said to be carry the grandmother energy or the mother energy, connecting you back
the divine. Yeah, the divine mother.
Yeah, connecting you to the planet, right? Our mother. Pachamama means our mother planet, right? That's what it was about. And so it really was lying in your mother's lap in a way, And the first thing that happened for me was I just started crying. I mean, I literally cried. I don't know how long. It felt like an hour, but who knows? But I had been emotionally blocked up for decades. I had not been able to cry. Something happened early in my marriage where I just got emotionally shut down, when I was mocked for actually having tears watching a movie, oh my God, what kind of man cries? It was like, it just shut me down. Like, I cannot show emotion, I'm not safe. So in those decades, so many sad things that happened, right? People died. I mean, there was just all kinds of tragedies, and I could never summon tears. I was just blocked up. And in that first period of that experience, I just, was grieving for all the people I had not been able to grieve for things, challenges my children went through, all of those kinds of things. And even for myself to some extent, what I had to live through with my father's rejection. And, there were even harder things as part of that. I mean, he literally threatened me. So, and then after that, I started getting visions. And I had gone there to learn about healing. I got a vision of, so this is what the world needs to heal, and this is what the world of business needs to heal, right? And the 4 words that were floating were love, innocence, simplicity, and truth.
Love, innocence, simplicity, truth.
And it actually came as an acronym. That's the list. Okay, LIST.
Of course, you had to boil it into an acronym.
I didn't have to work for that one. Yes, it's the list, the healing essentials list, right? And it's so clear to me, right, that we don't operate from love in business. We operate from using each other, right? We operate from self-interest. It's not about caring for you. It's about using you to make money for me, right? We have all lost our innocence. We are all born innocent, right? But that's kind of a helpless innocence. And then we get corrupted by the world, and we become cynical, and we exploit people, and we use people, and we abuse people. But there's another kind of innocence that we need to reclaim. As Nilima calls it, the innocence on the other side of wholeness. The powerful chosen innocence, right? If you look at people like the Dalai Lama and Gandhi and others, they had a sweetness and an innocence to them. Even Mandela, late in his life, was had that air to him, right? So what is that quality of innocence that we need to reclaim?
Because we have to. It has to be an active choice.
Yeah. And it has to imply the rejection of certain behaviors and certain values, right? That I will not be part of abuse, exploitation, knowingly causing harm, suffering, etc. And then simplicity. We have complicated everything in the world. We hide behind the complexity, right? Behind the numbers, we spin. And then truth. What's our commitment to the truth? I mean, I'm a marketing professor, right? What do we know about truth? But that's so essential. Without the truth, nothing else happens. So that to me was a profound learning. And then
Raj, I think you're frozen on my end. Oh, there you go. I got you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back.
One of the other things that happened for me was it was almost like watching a movie of my early childhood with a commentary, right? So I'm 2 years old. I'm in the village. My mom is trying to work in the kitchen, and she's the sort of the younger daughter-in-law. So the older daughter-in-law is kind of bossing her. And because I'm crying, so my aunt comes and she puts opium in my mouth, right? So she kind of knocks me out so that I don't make noise, so that my mother can keep working. It was that kind of an atmosphere. My grandfather yelling at her. So it was kind of saying, this is what you came from, this is what you experienced, this is what you learned, this is what was embodied, this is your purpose in life, etc. So it kind of took me through that. It's like connecting the dots, right, in your life and saying, wow, I had to have that experience. And even though I would not wish it upon anybody, it's still so it kind of over time I developed this what I call the path, right? It's my journey towards inner peace, healing, and a life of purpose. And I would say, if I had to now identify this, like starts with knowing yourself. You have to know who you are. What's your true nature? What's your essence? What makes you uniquely you? There's nobody like you. And then you have to get to love yourself. And for me, as I said, that was a huge gap between those two, right? Because of the programming from my father. Know yourself, love yourself, and then you have to be yourself. This is what you need to embody and bring to the world, right? And then beyond that, it's about choosing your life, everything that happened in your life, instead of remaining in a victim mindset. Why was I born into that? Why was my father like this? Why did I have to suffer that? It's like, if I had to go back, I would choose it, because there was, if you choose it, then it can serve you. If you don't, then you remain a victim to it, right? So that's kind of, so choose your life and all the people who came into it, even the most difficult people, right? And then so there's a bunch of steps like that, right? Be here now, of course, right? Choose to be grateful, right? Choose gratitude. And then one of the other things I learned in that Ecuador trip is that these cultures are very much rooted in dreams. They believe in the power of dreams. And one of their expressions is, the world is as you dream it.
Yes.
Like, if you look around, everything that's not part of nature was actually in somebody's head before it became manifested, right? Everything I see behind you existed inside somebody's mind, right? So the world is as you dream it. And if you don't like the way the world is, then you need to dream a different dream. Right? And you need to dream a different dream that connects to what you actually want the world to be like. And then, of course, you have to work towards that dream, right? Build that dream, work on it.
It's ironic too, because when we started this conversation, you said that you came from a family, a culture that never asked, what do you dream? What do you dream of?
You're supposed to follow, and you're supposed to play your role in a continuing, ongoing dream, which you had no part of authoring, right? You're supposed to be the son who takes over, the land and inherits the title. I mean, we literally had all of those kinds of feudal things there, right? So you're not allowed to self-author your life. You're supposed to play a role, and the role is prescribed for you at birth, in a way. Now, my father escaped from that in many ways, because nobody had been educated beyond the 8th grade in that family, and he goes on to get a PhD and get a gold medal, right? So for him, it was a much bigger, the escape velocity that he needed was much greater than what I needed, because I had the benefit of all these experiences, right? So, but then he came full circle back to his roots, and he became again, highly conventional and highly conservative and restrictive, and you can't marry somebody that you choose. You must marry an arranged marriage with a girl from our community.
So you can't even self-invent personally.
Yeah. And I think for him, it was like a circle coming back. For me, I think it was more of a spiral, hopefully going up, right? That I was actually able to, I did write an autobiographical piece called Full Circle, because I felt like, I lived in India as a kid, then we came to the West, and then I went back to India as 12 years old, and then I came back when I was 23, and I've been going back and forth ever since. And I'm able to kind of experience both and be equally comfortable in both, right? But not be fully consumed by it, and have some level of detachment.
Raj, I'm curious with this journey, like you've really aggregated all the pieces of your life into understanding the mosaic of your being, right? We come into the world, as you said, we are pure, we are innocent. We take on a bunch of change, you must change kind of patterns, and particularly when we're in a place to influence the lives of so many as leaders, etc. The journey you've outlined, it really explains how you ended up challenging the patriarchal assumptions of doing
Yeah.
this. But there's this weird thing happening. It's both a celebration of some of the values that you're talking about, and it's a backlash.
Yeah.
I'm a recovering marketer. I worked for Coke and I left because I didn't sell sugar water to kids around the world, right? And that was just my choice. I'm not saying that for anyone else, but this is a time of fear and of lack of trust. I mean, when you look, like, I really appreciate that you're shifting to unpack your journey. I'm just curious, what's your advice? Because you've been on the corporate end of it, you've looked at the personal end of it, but we're in the moment of really collective being spun out, right? Collective uncertainty, and love and innocence and simplicity. And was it truth or trust? It was
Truth.
So,
Trust, yeah.
One of my teachers said, love everyone, serve everyone, tell the truth. And that's been a guideline for me. But what do you feel like if you had a magic wand and you wanted to wish on folks that hear this, or folks who have contact with you with your book that you're working on now, what would you wish that they would know to do or know to live for?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think a few things are happening. First of all, there's a lot of unhealed wounds out there in the world.
Absolutely.
Everybody is in a state of PTSD, whether we acknowledge it or not. I mean, life is difficult.
I'm so glad you said that. Thank you for saying that. I've been saying it too.
Yeah, even independent of the last 4 years or even the last year. I mean, everybody, life is difficult and we have traumas. We never deal with them. We never face up to them, right? We never process them. And then, of course, we have the wounded inner child within us our entire life. And that then leads to people acting out and aggression and violence and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of healing that is necessary for all of us. And people need to turn inward and find the inspiration to actually, and the courage to go on that journey. I think what is happening in the world, because so much has changed in the last 30 years, we have lived in a time of tremendous change. I mean, we, in terms of India, we mark 1990 as the beginning of the age of transcendence. We came out of the age of knowledge. So there was the age of empowerment, when the US became a country and democracy and capitalism was empowerment. Then the age of knowledge was science and technology. And then the age of transcendence, where we're now aspiring to higher things. And if you look at everything that has changed since 1989 or 1990, right, tremendous strides have been made, right, in the world. That was the year the internet, the World Wide Web was created, right? We also had, the rise of women. We had the rise of meaning and purpose. We had connectivity at a level we have never seen before. We're becoming more intelligent, right? There's a spread of freedom around the world. All of those things are happening. It's a lot of change. And when any time when there's a lot of change rapidly, it does affect the order of things. So there are people whose privileged position is being threatened, right? It's even silly things like, if gay people get married, then somehow my marriage is not as special, right? Or if we have all these women coming through, then the men feel threatened. Or all the racial minorities and the immigrants, it all becomes. So I would say that the privileged position enjoyed by the patriarchy, it goes back to that and goes back to white male privilege in many parts of the world, especially here, that has felt to them under siege, and it feels like a loss of something, even though it's really not. It's not a zero-sum game that if somebody else is being treated fairly, that you're going to lose. But there's a mindset that is clinging to that. I do. I've used the Star Wars analogy.
Mhm.
I've noticed. I think Nilima also used it recently. Uh, that we were in a phase in the last 30 years where it was the Force Awakens,
Mhm.
right? After millennia, right? Women are waking up. Women are rising in society to their natural place, right? Reflective of their not only their numbers but also their inherent strengths. So it was the Force Awakens in multiple dimensions, right? The end of apartheid, right? The end of segregation, the end of giving gay rights, all of those things, And then, of course, the next stage is when you have that, you've got the Empire Strikes Back, and I think we're in the Empire Strikes Back phase of this, right? Where the established order is a rear guard action, right, to preserve its privilege and its position. But then there's always a third act, and that is the return of the Jedi,
Yeah.
and that is that ultimately truth and love and wisdom and togetherness, all of that has to prevail. I do believe that evolutionarily, we don't go in a straight line. We kind of go in a loop, right? But
Mhm.
we're going upwards. So we're kind of in that phase of, sort of consolidating and kind of meeting resistance. But that will then propel us
Yep.
to the next stage, right? So I believe Trump, these 4 years of horrendous, backlash actions, sort of is going to lead to more, I would say, discontinuous and radical change than
Yeah.
it would have otherwise. We're going to see things we would not have seen otherwise. So I
Yeah.
do believe that that's ultimately we're going to resume our forward path. And I think for the people who feel threatened, we have to figure out a way for them to. It's all coming from fear, as we know,
All
anger.
of it. Yeah.
Right? It's all
All of
coming from fear, right? For them to be able to, become vulnerable, let down that guard, open up. It says that patriarchy is not a boon to boys and to men, right? It is really a burden. When I was part of that patriarchal system in India, and I was given a gun at the age of 12 by my
it.
father, and I was encouraged to shoot everything I could, and I did that for a couple. I became like a crack shot. I shot everything that moved, and then one day I just got disgusted with myself. I said, why am I just killing birds and squirrels and whatever moves, just for target practice? And I told my father, I'm not going to do that anymore. And he got angry. He said, why? Why are you not going to kill?
Mm.
And when I was 13, there was a ritual where you had to actually behead a goat with a sword. That's kind of our coming of age ritual in that culture. You literally have to do a goat beheading, in front of a crowd with the fire and drums and all of that. The whole system tries to inculcate that in you. But I'm saying that those things create victims
Yeah.
of voice, right? And the patriarchy is harsh all around. And we send young men off to die as cannon fodder and all of that. So I think, as Lynn Twist says, when this, she calls this Sophia's century, right? That finally, when women are able to step into their role in society and play a co-equal role, that the bird of humanity has been flying for millennia with one wing tied behind its back, the feminine wing. And as a result, the masculine wing has had to work overtime and become aggressive and violent to keep us afloat, but we go around in circles. And now that the feminine wing is unfurled, we can go further, we can go faster, and we can rise higher. So there's a sense of relief that comes with that as well, as opposed to a sense of feeling threatened. So I think that's the great work of our time. Not only is it elevating the feminine, is actually sort of diffusing the fear
Yeah.
in the masculine and connecting the masculine to the feminine within them,
Yes.
right? And
And
one of
within
the books
all of us. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
exists, of
Within
course,
all of
within
us.
us, right? And then beyond that, I mean, the book that I want to write with Nilima next is the phrase that she uses, which is the wise fool of tough love.
Yep.
How do we each of us become the wise fool of tough love? So it's the masculine, feminine, the wisdom of the elder, and the innocence and the joyfulness of the child. We need to embody all of that.
We need all of that.
Well,
Raj, you are such a generous, loving, intelligent, and playful, wise, full of tough love. I'm so grateful to have shared you with whoever happens to watch this. And I'm heartened that I have you along on this journey and with a vision for the world that is more along the lines of I, thou, here, now, because that's what we need. And so I thank you so much for taking time out to share. I'm sure I'm going to like write you a zillion, oh, I forgot to blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
Thank you. Maha pranams.
Thank you, Tevis. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Raj.